In the shadow of the Holocaust, attention has turned to the question of what could have led millions of Europeans, most of whom considered themselves to be Christians, to view Jews in such demonic, dehumanized terms that they would not only countenance, but actively participate in their mass murder. Given the small size of Italy's Jewish population, the number of Jews murdered was perhaps 7,500. There were perhaps about 45,000 Italian Jews at the beginning of the war. Clearly, they're just almost a footnote to the Holocaust, a very small part of the carnage. Yet, if we're interested in examining the Vatican's role in the lead up to the disaster to come, the Italian case offers something of a privileged vantage point. Nowhere in the 2 decades preceding the Holocaust did the Vatican have as much influence as it did in Italy. Aside from the obvious reasons for this, the Pope, of course, was Italian, the entire Curia practically were all Italians, and the deal that the Vatican had recently struck with the Italian government, the famous Lateran Treaty of 1929, there was an understanding, a very close working relationship, as I'll try to indicate, between the two in a way that didn't exist, I think, in other countries, that is, between the government and the Vatican. What I'd like to do this afternoon, what I'd like to talk about is based on research Kevin alluded to. It's partly based on the fact that it was only in 2006 that the Vatican opened the archives for the papacy of Pius XI, 1922 to 1939. And I, along with a number of other colleagues, when we heard that this was going to happen, got very excited and began planning projects, one of which will be this book that comes out. Now, in chronicling the role played by the Pope and the Vatican in the promulgation of the racial laws, I'm going against a widely accepted narrative, certainly a narrative that's widely accepted within the Church and I think within Italy, which portrays a Vatican and a Pope who fought bravely against the racism that Mussolini embraced in 1938 and opposed the racial laws. That narrative, while comforting, I think can't withstand historical scrutiny. Now, as Kevin mentioned, it happens that 1922 was the year that both the Accelerati became Pope, replacing Benedict XV in February 1922. And then later that year, the famous March on Rome in late October led to the naming of Mussolini as the prime minister. You see him here in Popular News Weekly right around the time he was appointed. At the time, Mussolini had no problem with Jews. His mistress and major political advisor was Margherita Sarfatti, a Venetian Jew. I think I have a picture of her here with her husband, also from the Venetian Jewish community. It's a story I get into a little bit in the book, but will not this evening, so there may be some disappointment. Jews were active in the fascist party, and some had high positions in the fascist government. Historians have hotly debated how it was and why it was that in 1938, Mussolini announces this so-called racial policy, this anti-Semitic program. How did Mussolini come to believe that special laws were needed to be imposed on the Jews? In these debates over what led up to the imposition of the racial laws, the Vatican has received little attention. Yet I think no explanation of what happened is adequate without understanding the role it played. By far, the most important source of anti-Semitism in Italy at the time that Mussolini came to power was the Roman Catholic Church. While the demonization of the Jews was widespread in the Church, its single most influential source was the Vatican-supervised Jesuit journal, Civiltà Cattolica. The journal had quasi-official status. It was founded in 1850, shortly after Pius IX returned from his exile, returned to Rome, and he is the one who basically persuaded the Jesuit group to found it to be an opportunity for the papal message to get out to a broader public. Its editor was appointed by the Pope, and no article could be published throughout this period unless it was approved in advance by the Vatican Secretary of State office. The journal was not read by the Catholic masses, for it was pitched well above their heads, but it did offer Catholic opinion leaders, newspaper editors, the upper echelon clergy, with a window into the Vatican's perspective on the issues of the day. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, in the years modern anti-Semitism was taking shape, Civiltà Cattolica attacked the Jews mercilessly. Just give you a little flavor of this. The Jews, one of scores of such denunciations in the journal at the time warned, eternal insolent children, obstinate, dirty thieves, liars, ignoramuses, pests, and the scourge of those near and far, managed to lay their hands on all public wealth, and virtually alone they took control not only of all money, but of the law itself in those countries where they have been allowed to hold public offices. The church had long taught, pronounced the journal, that Jews needed to be kept separate from Christians, and otherwise the Jews would reduce Christians to their slaves. Quoting again, "Oh, how wrong and deluded are those who think that Judaism is just a religion and not, in fact, a race, a people, and a nation." As a noxious foreign body, the journal charged, Jews could never be loyal to the country in which they lived, as they schemed to exploit the generosity of those who foolishly accorded them equal rights. The election of Achille Ratti as Pope Pius XI in 1922 did nothing to stop Civiltà Cattolica's shrill demonization of Italy's Jews. Here we're the new Pope at his desk. In a series of articles in 1922, it blamed the Jews for the recent Russian Revolution and sounded the alarm against a Jewish conspiracy aimed at ruling the world. In late 1922, a few months after Pius XI became Pope, and as the fascists were marching on Rome, the journal published a feature article titled "The World Revolution and the Jews." It described a world in chaos, with labor strikes and unrest orchestrated by secret forces whose goal was communist revolution. The credulous masses participating in the revolts were mere stooges driven by an occult power, one that showed the telltale signs of coming from the ghetto. The world's future, the article warned, would be determined by the battle then being waged in Russia. The leaders of the Bolshevik reign of terror were not, quote, indigenous Russians, according to Civiltà Cattolica, but rather, quote, Jewish intruders who slyly masked their true identity behind Slavic-sounding pseudonyms. The journal, the Vatican-supervised journal, explained that a list of 545 highest officials of the Russian regime revealed that true Russians numbered no more than 30 out of 545. Quote, those of the Jewish race comprise a full 447, the rest being a hodgepodge of other nationalities. In short, though Jews composed under 5% of the Russian population, quote, this tiny minority today has invaded all the avenues of power and imposes its dictatorship on the nation. Now, the significance of this article and others like it is great because this argument would become one of the central tenets of the Nazis' own campaign to justify the need to do something about the Jews, namely the fact that Jews were behind the Russian Revolution and behind this worldwide communist conspiracy. It would be taken up by church publications throughout Italy. I won't spend the time today quoting from diocesan bulletins and Catholic action bulletins and so on that pick up these arguments from Civiltà Cattolica, the argument that the leaders of the Russian Revolution weren't real Russians but were Jews. There's been some research on this question. There may be others here who know more about this than I do. I'm not an expert on Russian history, but what I've read suggests that of 417 members of the highest leadership body in the Soviet Union in the mid-1920s, only 6% came from Jewish backgrounds. And this figure dropped sharply in 1930s, not least because of the anti-Semitic purges and trials of Stalin. In 1938, while Civiltà Cattolica and the Nazi government continued to warn that almost all the leaders of the Soviet Union were Jewish, a look at the membership of the 9-man Politburo, the highest government body, shows that only one of the 9 was from a Jewish background. Of the 37 members of the Soviet Presidium, 1 came from a Jewish background. But let's return to 1922. There's a bit of a digression there. 1922 was a fateful year for Italy, as you can imagine, a year in which Mussolini comes to power through semi-legal means. In the first issue of Civiltà Cattolica, to appear after Mussolini came to power in the fall of that year, the Jesuit journal carried news from Austria under the headline, "Jewish Masonic Socialism Tyrannizes Austria." Here it adds a second crucial element to what would be the conspiracy theory that not only the journal, but as I will discuss in a moment, the Pope's 2 principal emissaries to Mussolini would try to convince the dictator of over the next years. Following the Great War, the journal reported, Vienna's 19 Masonic lodges had formed a Grand Lodge. Quote, all of its high functionaries, without exception, were Jews. Their goal was to rule the world, quote, under the domination of the Masons, themselves under the Jews' power, unquote. If the Jews in Vienna have their way, the journal warned, again I quote, Vienna will be nothing but a Jewish city. Houses and belongings will all be theirs. The Jews will be the bosses and lords, the Christians their servants. And then they conclude, Austria will be absolutely the subject, tributary, and slave of the Jews. This, in short, is the guiding idea of our socialist Jewish Masonic leaders. From 1922 to Mussolini's imposition of the anti-Semitic racial laws in the fall of 1938, the journal repeatedly called for European states to undo the damage they had done in the previous century by giving the Jews equal rights. It urged Europe's governments to impose new restrictive laws on the Jews or risk national ruin. Its themes were picked up by Catholic journals and diocesan bulletins throughout Italy. Now, I mentioned that the Pope's own emissaries to Mussolini were, in these years, trying to convince him of the danger posed by Italy's Jews. And this is one of the things we find by the newly opened archives in the Vatican. And not just in the Vatican, Jesuit archives. There are other church archives that for this period have become available under the new policy. Far and away, the most important envoy Pius XI had to Mussolini was the Jesuit Father Pietro Tacchi Venturi. It's here. Shortly after Mussolini came to power, actually by January of 1923, there was an agreement made between essentially the Pope and Mussolini that they needed a secret emissary or semi-secret emissary to be able to guide their relationship with one another, and they chose this prominent Jesuit from Rome, Pietro Tacchi Venturi. Over the next 16 years, the Jesuit met privately with Mussolini probably over 100 times. No one was more influential in peddling the theory of an evil Jewish conspiracy to the Italian dictator. In 1926, a dozen years before Mussolini would publicly identify Jews as a national threat and introduce the so-called racial laws, Tacchi Venturi was already using his frequent meetings to warn him of the danger posed by the Jews. In September of that year, 1926, for example, he gave the Dupee a recently published 15-page pamphlet, Zionism and Catholicism. It's actually his first page shows it's dedicated to Tacchi Venturi. So Tacchi Venturi gives this to Mussolini. The booklet recalls how God condemned the Jews to wander the earth, cursed for rejecting Jesus. But it then focused on the more immediate dangers that the Jews posed. The author wrote, "No one can doubt the Jewish sect's formidable, diabolical, fatal activity in all the world," unquote. The Jews, he warned, sought revolution, Bolshevism, and, quote, to destroy current society and dominate the world by themselves as their Talmud prescribes.